This is the hardest story I have to tell, and I want to say that up front. Not for dramatic effect, but because I think you deserve to know the emotional weight of it before we get into it. It involves my father's death, which happened when I was in my late 30s, and a conversation that happened about 6 weeks before that death with a child I barely knew. A conversation that has lived in me ever since as the most inexplicable single event of my life. I've told it to 4 people in the years since. I'm telling it now because I think some stories need to be told even when they're hard, and because the strangeness of it and the gentleness of it are bound together in a way that I find comforting more often than I find it unsettling, which is something I didn't expect and that I want to pass on. My father had been ill for about 2 years before he died. Heart disease, the progressive kind, the kind that announces itself with a significant event and then becomes a managed condition, and then gradually stops being manageable. He was in his early 70s. He had been a vigorous man his whole life, the kind of man who went on long hikes well into his 60s and who had strong opinions about breakfast and who argued cheerfully about sports with anyone who would engage. And watching him become smaller and slower and more careful over those 2 years was one of the sustained griefs of my adult life, the kind that happens before the loss and that you live alongside before the actual ending comes. I had moved back to my hometown for those 2 years, not a dramatic sacrifice. I'd been thinking about leaving the city anyway, had been restless and ready for a change, and my parents' situation gave the decision a clarity that it might not otherwise have had. I rented a small house about 15 minutes from my parents' place, kept my work going remotely as much as I could, and spent a significant portion of my time at their house or available to them. That's the context. I was there. I was present for most of what those 2 years contained. The neighborhood I rented in was a quiet one, the kind of neighborhood that has been the same for 30 years and that families have been in for generations. The house next door to mine had a family in it, a couple in their 40s and their son, whose name was Oliver. Oliver was 9 years old when I moved in. A quiet kid, not shy exactly, but self-contained, the kind of child who observes more than they speak, and who, when they do speak, tends to say something worth hearing. We had the kind of neighbor relationship that involves waves and occasional brief conversations over the fence, the easy, low-maintenance friendliness of people who share a property line and mean each other well without being close. Oliver had a habit of sitting on the top step of their front porch in the late afternoon, just sitting, watching the street, thinking whatever 9-year-olds think about when they're sitting quietly watching the world. I'd come home from my parents in the early evening sometimes and see him there, and occasionally we'd exchange a few words as I walked up my driveway. He asked me once where I went every day, and I told him I was helping take care of my dad, who was sick. And he nodded with the serious nod that children give to adult information they're filing carefully. The conversation I want to tell you about happened on a Tuesday evening in September. I was coming back from my parents' house later than usual because my dad had had a harder afternoon and I'd stayed longer, and Oliver was on his step as I walked up. He said, "Hey." I said, "Hey back." I was tired and a little sad in the low-register way that became my constant companion during that period, and I probably wasn't my most present self. I was about to just wave and keep going. I said, "Sure, what's up?" He said, "Is your dad going to die soon?" Children ask the questions adults don't ask, which is one of the useful things about them. I stalked on my driveway, and I thought about how to answer honestly without putting something on a 9-year-old that wasn't his to carry. I said, "He's pretty sick. The doctors think it might be soon, yeah." Oliver nodded. He looked at me with the steady look he had, that particular quality of attention that made you feel like you were being actually seen rather than just regarded. He said, "When it happens, you're going to be driving. You're going to get a phone call. You're going to have to pull over." I stood on my driveway and looked at this 9-year-old on his front step in the September evening, and I did not know what to say to that. He said it plainly, not dramatically, not performing anything, just saying a thing he apparently knew the way he might have told me it was going to rain tomorrow. A statement, not a question. Not I think or I wonder, or maybe. "You're going to be driving. You're going to get a phone call. You're going to have to pull over." I said, "What do you mean, Oliver?" He thought about it for a second. Then he said, "I don't know exactly. I just see it sometimes. Like when something is going to happen a certain way, I see it before it happens." He paused. "I don't talk about it much." He said this last part with the matter-of-fact privacy of someone reporting a personal policy, not embarrassed, just informing me of how he operated. I asked him if he was sure about what he'd seen. He said yes. I didn't know what to do with it. I thanked him for telling me, which felt like the right response even though I wasn't entirely sure why he had told me. Maybe that was why, because he thought I should know, should be prepared, should have something to hold on to. I said goodnight and went inside. I thought about that conversation for the next 6 weeks, not constantly, but it surfaced regularly, bobbing up from the depths of the rest of what was happening. I turned it over and I tried to decide what to do with it. I could dismiss it as a child saying something that hit too close to something real by coincidence, the way children say things that land strangely, sometimes without meaning to. I could take it as the genuine perception of a child who was describing an actual sight. Neither explanation sat entirely comfortably, and I ended up simply holding it, carrying it alongside everything else I was carrying. My father died on a Thursday morning in late October. He went in the night, peacefully, in the way that the doctors had said was likely, heart failure during sleep, which they'd told us was the gentler version of the end. His condition was moving toward. My mother was with him. She woke at 4 in the morning to find that he had already gone. She called my brother first, then she called me. I was driving when she called. I want to tell you the specifics of this, because the specifics matter, and because I've gone over them many times since. I woke up at about 3:30 that morning, wide awake with no particular reason for it, the way you sometimes wake and your body has decided it's done with sleep, regardless of what the clock says. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes, and then, because I was awake and restless, and because I had a low-level feeling I couldn't name that I wanted to be in motion, I got up and got dressed and got in the car. I had no destination in mind, I just drove. It was 4 in the morning, the streets empty, the particular darkness of a late October night before dawn, and I drove through quiet streets without direction, which was a thing I did sometimes during that period when the emotional weight of things needed somewhere to go that wasn't a room. I had been driving for maybe 20 minutes when my phone rang, my mother's name on the screen, and I pulled over. I pulled over on a residential street I happened to be on, under a street light, and I sat in the parked car, and I answered the phone, and my mother told me, in the quiet voice of someone who has already absorbed the blow and is doing what needs to be done, that my dad was gone. I sat in that parked car for a long time after she and I had said what needed to be said and hung up. The street was empty and quiet, and the street light was doing its orange thing, and the leaves on the trees along the sidewalk were doing that thing October leaves do, and my father was gone and I had pulled over to receive the news exactly the way Oliver had said I would. You're going to be driving. You're going to get a phone call. You're going to have to pull over. I don't know what woke me up at 3:30. I don't know what sent me out driving at 4 in the morning. I was not a person who regularly did that, who got up in the dark and got in my car and drove aimlessly. I'd done it a handful of times during those 2 years when the weight of things needed somewhere to go, but not regularly, not as a pattern. Something moved me out of my bed and into my car on the morning my father died, and I have never had a better explanation for that than whatever it is that made Oliver see it 6 weeks before it happened. I knocked on Oliver's door a few days after my father's funeral. I needed to tell him. I don't know exactly why it felt necessary. Something about the idea that he had told me, had tried to prepare me, deserved to know that it had happened the way he'd seen. His mother answered, and I asked if I could speak to Oliver for a minute, and she looked curious, but said sure, and went to get him. Oliver came to the door and looked at me with those steady eyes. I said, "You were right about how it would happen. I just wanted you to know that you were right." He nodded, not surprised, not pleased with himself, just receiving the information with that same quality of attention he always had, taking it in and filing it. He said, "I'm sorry about your dad." I said, "Thank you." I said, "Does it happen often for you, seeing things like that?" He thought about it. He said, "Not super often, and mostly small stuff." He said, "Yours was a big one. That's why I told you. I figured you should know." I said, "I'm glad you told me. It helped. Even though I didn't know how to hold it at the time, it helped. I wasn't as alone in it as I might have been. He seemed to consider this. Then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, "I think that's why it works that way. So that you're not alone in it. So that you're not alone in it." I moved away from that neighborhood about 8 months after my dad passed. Oliver and his family were still there when I left, and we said goodbye the way you say goodbye to neighbors, with genuine warmth and some vagueness about keeping in touch that neither party puts too much stock in. Oliver was 10 by then, still quiet, still sitting on his step in the late afternoons watching the world with those steady eyes. I think about him sometimes. I wonder what he's seeing now, whatever age he is. I wonder whether the thing that showed him how I was going to find out my father died has showed him other things since, larger things or smaller, whether it's settled into his life as something he manages and navigates and occasionally shares with people when he decides they should know. I wonder if he's told someone else, some other neighbor, some other adult going through something, that calm, plain thing he told me. Not a question, not a maybe, just a thing he saw and wanted them to have so they wouldn't be alone in it. I think about Oliver and I think about what he said and I think about that October morning. The dark street, the empty city, the street light, the phone ringing, and I think about my father, who went gently in his sleep in the way the doctors said he might, and about my mother who woke to find him gone and did what needed to be done and called her children, and about how the call came to me while I was driving and I pulled over under a streetlight and received it and was not entirely alone in it because a 9-year-old boy with steady eyes had told me 6 weeks before exactly how it would go. I don't know what Oliver has. I don't know what to call it or where it comes from or why some people are built that way and others aren't. I just know that he used it on that September evening to do something kind, to prepare someone, to make sure that when the hard thing came it arrived alongside something else, some small piece of foreknowledge that kept the surprise from being total, that made the isolation of the moment fractionally less complete. That was a gift, an unusual and inexplicable and completely genuine gift. I hope Oliver is doing well, wherever he is. I hope whatever he sees is gentle with him, and I hope he knows, in whatever way things like that can be known, that it helped. Sleep well tonight. The hard things that are coming for all of us. And they are coming. That's the nature of things. Sometimes there are small kindnesses built into the structure of them that we don't recognize until after. But they're there. Good night.